released in 2000, and while Radiohead was touring to promote their critically acclaimed album OK Computer, members of Radiohead began to suffer burnout, and even Tom York was going through a mental breakdown while they were touring. And sometime after this, Radiohead decided that they need to do something about this because they were worried that they would become a one-trick band and that newer acts at the time were starting to imitate them. And even Colin Greenwood, Radiohead's bassist, stated that we felt we really needed to change everything. And this album sure proves that. Now, even though Radiohead changed some things around with KID A, what they did prior to the release of this album was unusual when compared to their previous 3 albums. When Radiohead released Pablo Honey, the band's OK Computer, there were music videos and singles, which are meant to promote an album. But with KID A, Radiohead refused to release music videos or release singles. There are no music videos or singles for KID A. And I'm under the impression that Radiohead wanted fans and maybe even new listeners to go into this album blind, which I think would be more surprising. And in retrospect, it's actually even more fascinating. Now, before KID A was ever released at record stores and retail, it did end up getting leaked on the internet, but it didn't really make much of a difference because KID A was successful in terms of sales. With all that said and out of the way, I know some diehard Radiohead fans are looking forward to me talking about KID A. So here goes. Everything in Its Right Place is the opening track of KID A. Now, the initial reaction by fans and critics was, by average, what the hell is this? This doesn't sound like Radiohead. We've known them for their alternative rock sounds. Why is this out of nowhere completely different? Well, there's a reason why I gave you that little history lesson about this album, but it actually works because it definitely was a surprise. Again, this album was not even marketed with singles or music videos. So the surprise factor really works with everything in its right place. And also the synthesizer is a nice little touch for this particular track because it was starting to prove that Radiohead was beginning to experiment. The one thing that might be a turnoff for some new listeners regarding this track is the nasally whiny vocals that Tom York does sing in this track. But I think it works because, let's face it, Radiohead's music is not sunshine and rainbows most of the time throughout their entire discography. And usually some of their music does have some bits of anxiety attached to it, so the nasally whiny vocals actually supports tracks that have anxiety or anything related to it addressed. Hell, the nasally whiny vocals works perfectly with Paranoid Android, and I think it supports this track as well. What follows is the titular track KID A, and I'm going to be really honest, the only time I actually enjoy listening to this track is when I'm actually listening to the whole entire album. I usually would not place this in a playlist, and I'm not saying the track is bad, but if we're going to go by strongest to weakest tracks one by one, I'm just going to say this KID A is kind of one of the weaker tracks in the album, but it totally fits. And I do find it fascinating how the vocals in KID A are synthetic and not, actual singing. So I like the effect that's used in this track. The one thing I do appreciate about KID A as a track is that it sounds like a lullaby, but whenever I listen to this track, I feel like I'm being taken somewhere, even if I'm sitting on a couch or on a chair or at the back of a bus. It's kind of an interesting feeling. But then, this album turned a 180. The first thing I'm going to say about the National Anthem is that bass. It sounds awesome. And I do think this is the track that Colin Greenwood, the bassist of Radiohead, shines the brightest on. Sure, he has done some pretty good bass guitar work and tracks before and since, but this is where Colin Greenwood, I think, sounds the coolest. Now, what's really nice about the National Anthem is that Philip Selway's drum instrumentation really supports the bass instrumentation, which actually makes the track quite a standout. And I can really jam to this track too. But what makes it even better is all the trumpets and saxophone and all those other horn instruments that are used in the National Anthem. This is quite a chaotic track as the song progresses. After 3 tracks is KID A's emotional high note, How to Disappear Completely. Not only is this an emotional track, it is also beautiful. Now, I understand that this track is likely to be a response to Thom Yorke's mental breakdown, and if that's the case, then, well, I still find it to be an emotional track, and that's because the acoustic guitar sounds beautiful, Thom Yorke's vocals is rather emotional, and the Onda Martino in the background really sells this track. Now you're probably wondering, what the hell is an Onda Martino? It is an electronic instrument that is used in this track, and it's not a very well-known instrument that's used in music these days and even music in the past. I would consider the Onda Martino to be a niche instrument since it's not really common today with most genres of music. But Johnny Greenwood did bring this instrument to a larger audience thanks to Radiohead concerts, especially their KID A tour and even onwards. How to Disappear Completely is definitely one of the highlights of KID A. There's not a lot I can say about Treefingers because there's really not a lot to this track. I know for sure it is not playlist friendly, but it does suit this album perfectly as an intermission to KID A. Then comes Optimistic, and this track does sound rather, well, the track title speaks for itself. And part of me thinks that this track was made as a response to the encouragement that Thom Yorke and or his fellow bandmates were going through, and they were probably encouraged to just try the best they can. Maybe that's the reason Optimistic was made, but I think some people could take some things out of this track and apply it to themselves. I mean, if I'm feeling down or whatnot, then this track does kind of help, I suppose, but I actually like this track for what it is, even if what I said about it may be true or just speculation, but I do dig this track. It then segues to In Limbo, which chucks all the optimism from the previous track out the window, because this track is rather blunt and it doesn't really sound pleasant at all. In fact, the lyrics, "You're living in a fantasy world," is kinda dark. There are other unsettling lyrics in this track, but if that wasn't enough, the climax of In Limbo gives me goosebumps. What follows is a rarity, even with Radiohead's entire discography, because from Pablo Honey up until this point in Kid A, nothing sounded like Idioteque.
I said coming, let me hear both sides, let me hear both sides, let me hear both.
I can imagine what it must have been like for fans and critics to react to Idioteque back in 2000, because Radiohead is not known for IDM, which stands for Intelligent Dance Music, and they never really did any tracks of that genre in their first 3 albums, and even the majority of Kid A until this point in the album. And come to think of it, since Idioteque, this is the only track in Radiohead's entire discography that is on the IDM genre. So it's a very interesting track, to say the least. And I think it's a pretty great track. Idioteque segues into Kid A's penultimate track, Morning Bell. Now, like with everything that's replaced, this track also has those nasally, whiny vocals that Thom Yorke has in this album. And like I said, it works given the material with the vocals. And the same applies with Morning Bell. Now, there's really nothing more I can say about Morning Bell. It's kind of a solid track for Kid A, but it really does work with everything else in the album. Now, there is a rather disturbing and somewhat dark lyric which is cut the kids in half. So, other than that, there's really nothing more I can say about Morning Bell. It's just there, and it does fit nicely as a penultimate track. Kid A concludes with Motion Picture Soundtrack, which I find to be a fascinating track in how it's constructed. Now, it starts off quietly with the quiet sound of the organ playing and Thom Yorke's soft vocals. And about a minute and a half, then harps start playing, and that's when I find the track a bit spellbinding, because the harps really sound beautiful to hear. But that's not the fascinating part. It's about 3 minutes and 18 seconds in the track where the music starts to fade out. And then we get a minute of nothing.
Nothing? Nothing?
I say this because after a minute of silence, there's actually a little bit more of this track. Now, I don't really want to call this a hidden bonus track. I would call it more of a hidden extension of Motion Picture Soundtrack. But after this little extension, then the remaining 1 minute and 51 seconds is, again, nothing.
Nothing, tra-la-la?
If you're planning on purchasing Kid A through iTunes or any similar digital retail, do keep in mind that the silent portions that are in the CD edition are omitted in the digital releases. The only format I do not know whether it has silent portions or not in Motion Picture Soundtrack is the vinyl format. All I know is that the CD edition contains silent portions of the final track of Kid A, and the digital edition does not. And since I blurred those formats out, it's pretty obvious that Kid A is available on CD as well as digital retail. And since it was reissued not too long ago, it is also easy to find on vinyl. Overall, Kid A is one hell of a surprise by Radiohead. This is nothing like their previous 3 albums, as good as their previous 2 albums were. This one was quite experimental at the time they released it, and this definitely surprised fans and critics. And I bloody love it! This is nothing like their previous 3 albums, as good as their previous 2 were. The overall instrumentation is as good as always, and the use of the Onda Martino was a welcome addition, since not many bands or music artists use that particular instrument, so it was nice that this band was known for bringing it to a larger audience. KID A may not be as thematic as Radiohead's previous album OK Computer, and that's fine because I do appreciate the change of scenery and change of pace, as well as KID A being an abstract album. Every track is good in this album. And whenever I listen to KID A, I always feel like I'm being taken to places, even though it's just music. But I like that kind of feeling. And when I stated that I consider OK Computer to be a bona fide masterpiece, but that wouldn't be their only one, I stated there was another. It is KID A. And I know for damn sure that everything is in its right place with this album. If you like this review, feel free to hit the like button. And if you want to follow my channel, please feel free to hit the subscribe button. And if you would like to request any bands or music artists that you would like me to review in the future, please list them down in the comment section down below. And as always, you are welcome to leave me a comment if you feel so inclined. And thanks for watching. And my next album review will be on Radiohead's 5th album, Amnesiac. So I will see you in the next review.